How many of you have ever gotten to an end of a session and in your last 5 minutes and you have a client say, oh, by the way, and you watch the clock, the big hand on the clock go to the 12 and on past the 12 to the 1, the 2, the 3, and you're becoming increasingly anxious and coercive with what you do to get your client out of the room. So much so that you damage the therapeutic relationship just to get your client out of the room. I'd like to show you a really cool technique for managing end of session to be able to get sessions closed without damaging the therapeutic relationship, and this is a pretty elegant way. For those of you who are trained in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, I got trained in a long time ago, and I specialized for a whole lot of years with personality disorders, specifically with BPO and BPD, borderline personality organization, borderline personality disorder. And when you work with that population, you're working with people who have had severe attachment trauma. They have never had secure attachment. And people that have never had secure attachment they get launched into adulthood with an insatiable hunger for connection, paired with the intolerance of intimacy. And that may be as close to hell as you can get without dying, because as soon as the person gets the connection that they have been hungering for, then the seesaw goes the other way, and it's perceived threat. And now what happens with a lot of folks who are borderline is they try to manage that anxiety by proximity. They try to figure out, distancing, how to be just the right distance, and it's never the right distance, because too much distance and it's the fear of abandonment. Too close, it's the fear of engulfment, and they're constantly trying to mitigate this technically, mechanically. And what's really fun that I didn't realize until the past 10 years or so, and DBT certainly helped with that. There's a lot of what you're hearing here is a lot of underpinning with DBT stuff. This is kind of this course is sort of DBT light. And for those of you who have ever practiced dialectical behavioral therapy, you know that there's a whole lot of setup that goes into a session. And some days I would have 5 borderlines in my caseload that day, and I would have spent 2 or 3 hours the night before of Xeroxing and organizing exercises and what we were going to be doing in that session. And this was when I was way more OCD than I am today. And I would have my color-coded files that I'd bring, and I'd have them set up on the wire thing on my desk, and that client would come in, and I'd have that all prepared. And I would have done a wonderful session, and we would have taken 4 steps forward in treatment. And then there would be this, the monkey wrench would come into the cog at the end of the session, and then it would get all compressed, and I would get anxious and irritated and would have taken 3 steps back from the 4 steps that we gained just to get my client out the door. And one of the things was just the maturation. The maturation helped a lot. When I started understanding that that was not my clients trying to punish me, that instead a couple of things were happening. One is they were testing me, but not consciously testing me. This was all intuitive. What a person with borderline, with any of the cluster Bs, has to see from a therapist is their ability to hold on to themselves and to hold the boundaries without becoming aggressive or hurtful. That's what makes a safe environment. That's what has to be demonstrated usually more than once in treatment before somebody with that much fear relationally begins to settle down and do the work. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it conceptually, but I didn't know how to practice it. And when I started getting that, and when I started to be able to self-regulate and be able to hold on to myself and hold those boundaries, things just settled down. There were less and less crises, less and less hospitalizations, and more work got done. because what I'm doing with folks that have borderline organization today is I'm teaching them to regulate their fear of abandonment and regulate their fear of engulfment so they can tolerate closeness and they can tolerate distance. You're like the rest of us, that relationships scare us. Yours is just more intense than the rest of us. But it's still muscle tension, and you can bring relaxation to that muscle tension. The other thing that I learned, and I'll share this with you, was I also was at the time specializing with dissociative disorders and working a lot with what was called then MPD, is now DID. And I had my first client, and that's how most people become skilled at doing this, is they have their first client that shows up in their office and an altar pops out, and it's always really intriguing. And I got kind of jazzed and excited and scared about that. And I had a little bit of means, and so I followed Richard Clough around the country for a while. And I went to every workshop he did. And those of you who don't know who Richard Clough is, he is the god of dissociative disorders. He was the editor of the Journal of Dissociation. He's a psychiatrist, psychologist at Temple. Just a genius. There's just nobody that has put up treatment numbers of integration with DID like he has. There's just nobody near him. He's a practitioner. He's a clinician. And following him around the country and doing his workshops and learning his structural integrationalism, which a lot of what that's the kind of foundation that Richard Schwartz's internal family system sits upon. One of the things that I heard from him and learned about is he called it Clough's rule of thirds, which sounds pretty narcissistic, and he's one of the least narcissistic people I've ever seen present. But what he suggests that we do when we do therapy is that we imagine splitting the session into thirds, into three triunal quadrants. They're not quadrants, they're tridents, I guess. And if it's a 50-minute session, that would mean 18, 18, and 18. So what he says that if you don't get the charged, affectively driven, emotionally driven stuff open in the first 2/3 of therapy, if you get 35 minutes into the session, you don't let it open up in that last third. Is that you go ahead and draw the boundary and stay firm with that boundary. So, if we were 40 minutes into the session and my client started bringing this stuff that was really intense forward, I go, nope, we're not discussing that today. And they'll look at me like this and say, well, and they'll keep talking about it. And what I do, a little bit playfully but also seriously, I go, la, 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 la. I'm serious. I'm not listening to this. We're not doing this today. And listen to my tone. It's very clear. It's unambiguous. We are not going to be addressing this. Matter of fact, I want you to bring back to next session. We'll start next session of why you would wait so long into the session to bring something that important forward. But we're not addressing it today. We do not have time. And I'm not going to let you do that to yourself. And though, as you hold that and you get clear that that's not okay, then you stop getting the pushback. They'll flip you off and they'll cuss you, but it won't be game playing anymore. They'll just go and then that's done. And what you've just demonstrated to your client is that you can hold on to yourself. You've made that a safe place for them. If you're squishy with that boundary, they have to keep pushing it. They have to keep finding where your limits are. So you got to demonstrate to your clients early on that you can hold that boundary. That's safety for them. But when you work with that population, actually you work with all your clients, they're wily and crafty. And they still get it in there at the end of the session. And if you work with borderlines regularly, then more than once in your career, you're going to hear in the last 5 minutes of a session, Eric, I was raped last week. That's part of the lifestyle. That's part of the way that people with borderline personality cope, is they become undefended in intense relational context, and they just can't engage their neocortex to protect themselves in that situation, so they become frequently submissive. And that happens a lot, and it's sad. And you really can't just say, well, that's nice, we'll pick that up next week. You're really compelled to offer something there. So what I did was I came up with a technique that works pretty nicely. And the first thing that's really important to do is, if you get into the last 5 minutes of a session and it's clear that it's not going to resolve, that your client is crying, that there is, this stuff coming forward, and you got clients waiting and you can't go over, and you need to bring it to a close, stop talking. You're not going to get this resolved with words. It's going to end up getting just more and more pressured, more and more compressed, and it's just not going to, it's going to have a bad outcome. So what you need to do is a scenery change. So what I do when my clients are kind of crying in the last 5 minutes, or they're, there's all this energy coming from them, is I just get up and I go grab my clipboard that has the blank 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper on it. I grab my Sharpies and I walk over to my client and I set down the clipboard. They're still talking, and and they keep looking up at me like, what's he doing? And I just don't say anything. I just go ahead and lay the clipboard down there, and I set the colored markers beside them, and they're going, oh, what? And I say, I'm glad you asked. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take that paper and those pens, and I'm going to ask you to draw an expression of whatever's happening inside of you right now. I want you to get all of that out. Just whatever, don't draw a pretty picture. Just take the next 2 minutes of clock time, and I want you to get it all, whatever's going on in there, get it out. And bring it forward. 2 minutes, go. 2 minutes is not enough time. It's enough time, I promise you. Just trust me on this. Do it. Put pen to paper. Get all of that energy out of you, and they'll start, and then you'll see them. They'll just, and I give them the 2 minutes, and at the end of 2 minutes, I say, stop, put your pen down, and look up here at me. I didn't get done. You got enough done, I promise you. And then I move this into closure, and I'll show you the closure here in just a minute. And I started doing this, and I found that 95% of the time this works. It's a cool tool. It works nicely. It packs it away, so that your client can get on with the rest of their lives and not be constantly intruded upon by this. And what I found was that after doing it for a few months, I found that this same technique works really nicely for clients who are hemorrhaging with trauma. And this happens frequently. I don't know, 1 in 15, 1 in 20, somewhere in that neighborhood of my clients, that they come into treatment, and we start doing the first couple of sessions of assessment and talking through doing their graphic timeline. And what starts happening is they've come in because they've got this one trauma, and as they start reviewing their life, that they uncover other trauma memories that they didn't know that had happened to them. That these memories were amnestic, that they had amnesia for them. And when we start doing this assessment process, suddenly they can come forward, and they're remembering an episode or episodes of sexual abuse, or a murder, or something that they didn't even, that had been completely dissociated. They had no awareness that this had happened in their lives. And suddenly, it just comes forward, and it's devastating. And what happens is that it won't go back into the hole, and it constantly intrudes. And during the period that, the couple of weeks that it's intruding, is that their ADLs drop off. They're constantly difficult to concentrating, because they're being, this is coming forward over and over, and their friends think that they're perseverating with it. They're not thinking about it. It's intruding. It's now come forward. And the genie was not going to go back in the bottle. So this same technique works really nicely for clients that you have in early treatment that are having a lot of flashbacks and nightmares, that are having a lot of intrusive symptoms, and they're not yet ready to do memory processing, that we've got some more skills that I got to teach them before they get ready to be able to tolerate this process of doing, whether we're doing narrative processing or EMDR, then this is a nice stopgap, a temporary containment strategy. And what I do is I take the clipboard. I wouldn't wait till the end of the session. You can do this with multiple memories. And so we might start off the session of, you uncovered all this stuff last week, and I hear you telling me that it's causing you all kinds of distress. Let's put this away for a little while until we're ready to work on it. What do you say? And I hand them a clipboard. I hand them, that's got paper on it, and I give them the Sharpies, and I say, I'd like for you to take the next 1 minute of clock time, 2 minutes for the closure of a session, because I want them to externalize as much as they can. 1 minute for containment, because we're containing it. We don't want them to spend a lot of time in this trauma. So I have them say, I say for the next 60 seconds, what I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to draw a symbol of this trauma, something that is an abstract symbol of it. Don't draw me a pretty picture. If it's a motor vehicle accident, maybe it's skid marks on the road, or maybe it's a steering wheel. If it's a dog attack, maybe it's a paw print, or a picture of the teeth, or whatever else. The only thing that needs to happen is that if I were to take this out and show this to you in 2 months from now, it would immediately evoke that memory. That's the only requirement. I want you to take 60 seconds, and it can be just as simple as a geometric shape. Go ahead and draw that symbol. 60 seconds, go. Tick, 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 tick. Now here's what's cool for both of those two things. And then the closure is the same for both of them. So stop, put your pen down, look up here at me. Even if they didn't write, even if they didn't draw anything on either of these two activities, what they've been doing is they've been projecting all of this stuff onto the paper. So the paper itself, even if it's blank, still represents whatever it is that needs to get dealt with the next session, or whatever the trauma is represented just by the paper. So while my client is doing the drawing, what I've done is I've gone to my filing cabinet and I've gotten a 9x12 envelope. And as soon as they're done with either one of these, as I said, the closure is the same. What I do is I hold the envelope open and I say, I'd like for you to go ahead and insert that drawing in the envelope. And I don't look at it, I just have them put the drawing in there. I fold the flap over, I hand them the stapler, and I say, staple this as many times as you need to make sure it stays in there. And sometimes they staple it once, but usually they lay it down on the counter and chunk, 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 and they may staple it 20 times, and that's fine. And then I write their name and the date across the flap to show them that it's not been opened. And then I make a little production of this. And I kind of take this and I hold it to my chest. And I say something like this. You and I both know there's some more work to be done on this. And we'll get to it. I promise you. But here's the deal. Therapy happens here in my office. Your life happens out there. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is I'd like to hold on to this and the thought or the memory or the condition and all the pain and fear that goes with it. I'll keep it locked up in my filing cabinet, and someday in the future we'll pull it out and we'll talk about it and walk through it. Would that be okay with you if I hung on to this? And my clients always say yes. And so I put my 2 hole punches in it, and it goes in their case file, and now it's locked away. Now here's what's interesting, and I can't tell you the mechanism for this, but I can just tell you that it works, is what happens when your client leaves your office after you've done that and they think about that trauma. It comes up in their mind, and what happens is they go, oh, Eric's got it, and it goes poof, and they're able to now focus on the rest of their lives. It no longer perseverates. Now it won't last forever, usually. Sometimes it does, but usually it won't. But it will last temporary. It will last for a few weeks to a few months that the person gets relief from it and they're able to focus on the rest of their life. This is called a containment strategy. It's using the natural dissociative capacities that your client has to lock this away. Now the caveat to this is the next time that I see my client, after I've done the first 5 minutes of the SRS, the next session, I hold this back up and I say, are we working on this today? And if my client says, yeah, I hand it to them and I say, go ahead and take that drawing out, and you see where we are. We're at the beginning of the session. We got the whole session to talk about this, to work through it, to figure out what needs to get done around it, build plans, lower arousal, whatever else needs to get done. If they go, no, I don't want to look at that ever again, I don't think. I say, that's fine. Would you like for me to keep it, or would you like to take it with you? No, you keep it. Happy to do that. But what I'm not willing to do is I'm not going to pull this out every week and stick it in your face. I need for you to be responsible for letting me know when you're going to be ready to work on it. Would you take that responsibility? Yep. Okay. And that's now in safekeeping in my filing cabinet. I can tell you a sweet little story about that. Saw a woman, I guess it's been 6 or 7 years ago, the first time that I saw her. She was referred by a friend, and I saw her for the first time, and it turned out that she did not know that she was DID. And she kind of, multiple parts emerged in the very first session. And what happened was that she felt, if you've worked with that population before, you know that what causes DID usually is heinous trauma before the age of 5 years old, usually at the hands of caregivers, usually sexual, not always, but usually sexual. And she just shared one of those heinous memories, and brought it forward, and it was just spontaneous, that I didn't really have the time to cut her off. It just came forward. And as soon as it was over, I did this with her, and we put the memory in the envelope, stapled it up, and it went in the filing cabinet. And she left feeling good. The next day, I went out saw clients the next day. I had her scheduled for the next week, and I walked out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and to get my next client. My next client hadn't shown up yet. I'm thankful for that. Was running late, but she, from the previous day, was sitting in the waiting room, and my borderline klaxons went off, whoop, 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 because that's a borderline behavior. And she looked up at me very appropriately and said, Eric, could I talk to you for just a second? And I said, sure, come on back. And the way my office was set up is there was an ante room, kind of where I did the business, and then it opened into a interior counseling room that had a separate exit, so it was really nice. So I brought her into the ante room. We didn't sit down. I just stood there, and I said, so what can I do for you? And she had on a shoulder bag, and she unzipped the shoulder bag, and she pulled out a stack of 25 envelopes, handed them to me, and said, would you keep these for me? And I said, I'd be happy to. And then, we did a few more sessions of stabilization and skills building, and then what we ended up doing is we just kind of fanned that out on the table and said, which one of these are we working on today? And we either did narrative or EMDR around, I think we ended up working with 5 or 6 or 7 of those, and what happened was that there was a spontaneous, which is frequently when you do 3 or 4 or 5 in a row of successfully with your clients, what happens is their system learns how to heal. The trauma learns how to integrate that, and they stop being phobic of their history, and they begin to be curious about it. And what happens is there's a couple of week period where the wheels come off the trauma wagon, and that was what happened for her. And so that's a pretty cool tool. I have that written out. There's a link there for it with all the resources that you can use to practice this. And if it's useful for you, I invite you to take that with you.